mandate of now doing what Parliament has ordered is on the Attorney General. It was delegated to the National Council for Law Reporting in 2009, and since then we have been revising the laws. Thank you so much.
I'm just curious to understand, are there times where you're like, no, we cannot do that because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you have such instances?
No.
Or whatever has been passed?
Actually, the mandate of making law is principally for the legislature.
Yes.
And I say this deliberately because currently the legislative arm is both at the national and county level. And it's bicameral at the national level. So we have the National Assembly and Senate. One of the principal issues raised by the act that confers us with that mandate of law revision, Chapter 1 of the laws of Kenya, is that a revision process should not lead to any alteration into the content. Then we'll be incursing into the mandate of Parliament or the county assemblies for that matter.
Okay. All right. And we'll also get to understand there's a whole aspect about revision versus reform, but we'll talk about that as we continue with the conversation. Titus, let's get to understand more about Forum Civ. I was about to say CIV, and that is what a lot of people say that, right?
Yes, absolutely.
CIV. But it's Forum Civ. Okay. Yes.
Forum Civ.
Forum Civ, yeah.
And thank you so much for having us this morning, and I'm happy to contribute to this very important conversation at a time when policy is becoming increasingly important as a direction for development. Forum Civ, as the name says, is a civil society organization. So we are a forum for civil society organization, and we were founded in Sweden back in 1995 out of a merger of two of the largest civil society organizations then. And at that time we had about 100 and something member organizations. So it's keen to note that it's a membership organization. So it's organizations that come together to form Forum Civ. Previously, of course, we had Forum Seed, which connotated a relationship between development in the South-North relationship. But that has since changed. So we are now a platform for civil society organizations, hence the name Forum Civ. We are now the largest platform in Sweden with over 200 member organizations now currently. And for that reason, then that has allowed us to work with our members, but also with communities across 70 countries in the globe. We work through regional offices. We also have country offices, and so the regional office for Eastern and Southern Africa, where I am placed, that is based here in Nairobi, supports work across 25 countries, and our interventions are really focused around democracy, human rights, with the facets of gender equality, environment and climate change, and conflict sensitivity, and do no harm. And as we talk about these conversations on development, then we feel that the biggest meal on the menu of development is democracy. And of course, some of these conversations around participation, how do we ensure that people are able to participate effectively, and therefore this conversation on policy lies squarely within our mandate and then our vision to create a just and sustainable world where all people have the power to effect change, and therefore we work to develop the capacity of communities, and particularly those marginalized communities who are either organized. We also work with individuals to ensure that then there's a voice, and then people can actually voice their concerns. There is freedom of association and freedom of expression.
Absolutely. And of course, all those things tie together to the conversation which we'll be focusing on today, and mentioning the whole aspect about participation. A lot of people, most of the time we hear, we have never been involved. We were not involved. Why has this been passed and we were not involved? And even when it comes to development as well, a lot of people would say, but that is not what we wanted, you know. We just decided to come up with all this, you know, sort of like quote unquote solutions, but we were not involved, and that doesn't work for us. So understanding why it's important, first of all, for public participation, but at the same time also getting the people to participate, because it's one thing to have that room for participation, but it's another to have the people there to participate. So we'll talk about that as we continue in the conversation. But for now, let's first of all get to understand public policy process, because that is the subject of the conversation this morning. And Professor, do you want to take us through, first of all, what, you know, that is all about, and what is it that people really need to understand when we're talking about policy, like Tata's mentioned, in this day and age where policies really, really matter?
Thank you very much. When we talk about policy, basically we are looking at a course of action or a pathway that has been chosen by an entity, an organization. In the context of national policies, we are talking about the pathways or course of action that state or government entities, both at the national level and the counties, have taken to ensure that they meet the ends. For us, the end is very clear, because since 2010, the Constitution does provide a framework for governance and leadership. And therefore, every policy is intended to direct to those ends that the Constitution desires for the people or mwananchi in Kenya. So public policy is critical in the sense that it develops the course of action that any entity, whether at the national level or at the county level, will be taking. Now, clearly, the policies may be implemented through legislation. Legislation is where the parliament comes and enacts a law. But in many cases, these legislations that are enacted are not underpinned by policy. There is a need that is perceived in the society, and with those needs, one comes and develops a platform for legislation without necessarily determining the priority. Now, policy formulation entails a critical choice of the available positions or options within the society. And that then becomes important to inform the best way to deal with certain matters. You've heard the saying in Kenya that the problems we face are not entirely because of lack of legislation. Perhaps it's just a policy framework for implementation of this legislation that is lacking. And maybe sometimes it's because those legislation were not critically linked to the policies for intended outcomes to be able to be achieved. And therefore, for us, it has been critical, and that is indeed why we partnered with Forum Civ to develop a structure by just understanding what the challenges are in terms of policy formulation at the county levels. Again, one of the things that you'd note in terms of national legislation, because the national government has been there for a long time, it may not face as many challenges as the counties with regards to policy formulation. And therefore, our approach was to look at the counties to make it at par with the national system. Thank you.
All right. And majority of the times, again, like you said, there are two arms, right? We have the county and we have the national government. So during this process, and that is as far as policy formulation is concerned, how then do we balance this so that we, you know, counties do not find themselves where they are in collision with the national, you know, policies as well?
And that is very interesting, because if you look at Schedule 4 of the Constitution, it does say policy formulation is the role of the national government. That is not to say that the counties cannot generate a policy. The only what it means is that at the national level, the policy is supposed to underpin the entirety of that operation or function in all the counties within the nation, so that the development is unified. But at the county level, even to implement the national policy, there is need for interpretation and domestication or localization of those national policies to suit the environment within the county. And therefore, in many cases, of course, one would want that every decision that is taken by either the national government or, more specifically, the county government now, are underpinned by a policy. It's not that I wake up one morning as a governor or as a CEC responsible for a particular docket and decide that this is the chart,
from
the path we are going to chart.
Okay. All right. I see that. And then where does this leave the people? Okay, because again, this the leadership, county leadership, we have the national leadership. So where are the people?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question,
Yeah.
because as Prof mentioned, even the Constitution stated clearly that policy making is more government affair, for lack of a better word, and I think now when we start bringing in aspects of public participation, and I think the Prof can delve into that later, is we have seen time and again that there has been court rulings, there's been decisions that have been made based on the lack of public participation. So that clearly tells you that it's very important for us now to start asking ourselves, where are the people? And how do we get these people on board? And I think you mentioned at the beginning that you always find people will keep saying, you know, I was not involved in this decision. And I think that's where now us as civil society organization comes in, because one of the key challenges that we realize in that whole process of ensuring that there's participation, that the voice of the people is captured, is a lot of the time people don't have the right information. They either don't have that information at the right time, that information is not available anywhere, so then that affects how people can actually participate in that process. And therefore, in the end, that's why you will hear people say, I don't know who decided that this project needs to be done. And I think that was the inspiration for us to partner with Kenya Law, because for the Public-Private Development Partnerships project, which we have been implementing for the last 6 years in Narok and Nakuru counties. This is a project that we are co-implementing together with other partners, as the name says. One of the co-implementing partners is the International Labour Organization, and we are receiving catalytic support from the Swedish government through their Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency and the embassy here locally. So the inspiration because we work with communities, but when you go to the communities, and then I think the key question we need to ask ourselves is, what is the yardstick of measuring the effectiveness of a policy? For those who make policies, they are probably the indicators they can do, but for communities, I think it's basic. We just need to see effective service delivery. So if services then are not getting to the people, then the question was, why is this not happening? So from the interactions with the marginalized communities, then is how we were able to start asking ourselves, what is the policy, for example, on public participation? How do people get involved in this process? So there seemed to be no clear direction. So we went further ahead and asked ourselves, who is responsible for that? And because the Public-Private Development Partnership project also seeks to have a platform for government, then we went to the government and asked, where are these policies? What is your direction on a lot of these issues that are affecting the communities? Who decides when projects will be done? How much will be allocated for this project? So that now led to that kind of dilemma, that there seems to be no clear direction and you realize that every 5 years, and what we've seen in counties, that what Prof mentioned, that there's a change in the administration. So what does that mean?
And the new administration will come with their own
absolutely
ways of doing business.
That now combined with the challenge that our counties are still quite new, they are grappling with quite a number of things, really inspired us then to have a conversation within that partnership, of course guided by some of the existing global policies like the Sustainable Development Goals, where Sustainable Development Goal 17 actually recognizes the value of partnerships like what we have done with Kenya Law, because there is no single entity, whether government, whether civil society, that has all that it needs to overcome all the other 16 challenges that have been identified through the global goals. So then that's how we figured that let's work with Kenya Law to ensure that even as the counties take shape, there's a model within which they have to work with.
Yes, structure.
Yeah.
I see that. And we'll come back and talk about, the study. And I'm also curious to understand, what are the people saying, really, as far as these policies are called? First of all, do they even understand that these policies not only exist, but sometimes they can also question, right, to really get to understand, does it fit our needs as a community, as a people, and if not, what else can we do? Because Prof, you also mentioned earlier on that it's easy to formulate some of these policies, but if they do not really meet the need of the community, then the entire, the entire policy really does not help. But before that, very quickly, in getting to understand then the whole process as far as the revision of laws, because again, we have had this conversation over and over and over again, where there is the revision, of some of these laws. What does that process really look like? And of course, the what we talked about earlier, where we said the difference between law revision and law reform. So can we just really address that and then get into the study?
Actually, that's one of the questions that we keep on getting when we go out and tell people you're Kenya law. First, the name Kenya law meets that context of the Kenya Law Reform Commission, which is another public entity established by law for works of law reforms. Law revision is a process of updating the laws which have already been created. So the county laws will come and you want them to be in a particular format of volume that you can have ease of access to. So it's an end product of a process. The parliament has already made all the deliberations and analysis and formulation has been done. Now you just need to communicate it in a manner that is understandable to whoever is going to be using and implementing the laws. That is law revision. All right. Law reform, on the other hand, is looking at the pitfalls, the shortcomings of the existing framework, or a gap that has not been addressed in an existing law, and then recommending those changes to be implemented through the legislative process. Sometimes you don't even need to legislate on them. You can just formulate a policy that would effectively implement existing laws. So reform is a back-end process where you look at the gaps, create a framework or a structure for ensuring that those gaps are addressed through appropriate action. Law revision, on the other hand, is a front-end process. You have already formulated this, you want to package it in a manner that is utilizable by those who are implementing or those who want to utilize those laws that have already been made.
Absolutely. All right. So, and speaking about the communities and their understanding as far as these laws, some of these policies, a lot of times people will say, here in Kenya, we have the best laws, we have the best policies, but implementation is where there is a bit of a challenge.
And sometimes it's not just about implementation. Actually, it's just a lack of understanding of the existence of those policies. Laws. And I can give you a live example. When we went to Narok, the county had done a deliberate cause of developing a clinic at Suswa. Something that is very useful and important to the community. And I think they had deliberately done that in order to serve the local population. But the local population had not initially been engaged into that process. And therefore, the questions were, why a clinic, why so close here? Do you want us to, probably not have children and all those issues that come? Because you have not consulted us, and we don't know exactly why you ended up choosing a clinic and not a school, or not a road, or not electricity. So why are you prioritizing what you have chosen? And sometimes, therefore, it's not about the lack or the depth in the policy. It's just that understanding of the policy is very critical, because if you want me to be bound or to support a process, then let me know exactly what that process is. And in most cases, that's what the outcome of the engagements that we have had with the community is. And for us, from Kenya Law's perspective, for us to be efficient in reporting and making these laws useful, there's need to track it from the outset.
Yeah.
What was the policy formulation? Were the citizens participating in that formulation? Do they agree with it? And therefore, those choices can be all good, but let's make it also responsive to the public. Let them own it, so that even if it's not going to be the best choice that we have made, at least it has the blessing of the community. And sometimes implementation of what people have already decided on would be more effective than trying to introduce something that the people need, but they don't know that they need, or they don't feel they need it at this time.
I see that. Yes. And that totally makes sense, because again, what you're saying, some of these very valid questions that a lot of people would ask. Why set up a clinic? Why not a school? Why not this? Why not a well? You know, for example, because we need, you know, water and all those things. But then again, so there's one thing to involve the society, but there's also another thing to have them participate, because majority of the times we have seen either government entities, maybe county government leadership, sort of like offering incentives for people to come and participate and be part of this policy formulation, because otherwise they would not turn up. So then that leads to the question of, so then how do we, the word I'm looking for, so then how effective is this? If you're offering me incentive to come, I'll just come because I'm getting something from the SIM. I don't know if this is something that maybe the people pointed out during the study.
No, I think, of course, you being a Kenyan, you have put it spot on in terms of what, and I think the key question there would be, why would somebody incentivize you to be part of a process? And I think my answer would be the interests. So whose interests are at play here?
Yes.
And I think for those things then to happen, we have to ask ourselves several questions. I know Prof has put in the indication in terms of the intention. And the policy providing that intention. And I think I mentioned that for us working with communities, we realize that the yardstick for communities is what needs are being solved, whether it's our water problems, whether it's our health problems. But then if you look at it, communities see policies differently.
All right.
Kenya's history with policy, if you look at it from the sessional paper number 10, I think of 1965, that pointed out the key challenges the independent Kenya needed to solve of poverty, literacy, and I think disease. Was a key landmark in terms of pointing to people. And so when you work with communities, if you look at Vision 2030, for example, as an economic development policy, people will say, you know, we are seeing things coming up, communities. We are seeing a new railway coming up. We have seen new health centers. We have seen new power stations coming up. But then that policy direction that is provided from that level needs to have a feel to the community. So if the communities do not see how that policy is going to solve their problems, then that's what leads to some of the things you're alluding to, that then because things have to go on anyway, the legislators have to have a budget that is passed at a certain period of time. They also have, and I think when it comes to now accountability, one of the principles of the rights-based approach is also asking ourselves if people have to be given money or incentives to participate in this process, where is this money coming from? And so this challenge of also us being a brick and mortar economy where we only focus on the physical things, what can be done, then someone needs to make you see, you know, we are building a structure, a health facility. But for the communities, it's beyond that four-wall structure. There has to be equipment, there has to be staffing, and that's now where we really need to have a deeper conversation on helping the community understand that there is more beyond you getting an incentive to participate in this. And you could be sacrificing your interest.
No, really,
And if I may chip in, perhaps from the court's perspective, it's about the effectiveness of the public participation. Because we know of situations where initially at the beginning of devolution, you would seat people, you know, give them a small token transport and per diem, and tell them what you are doing.
Yeah.
And have no opinion or report that is made from that process, so that you have done it in the ecclesiastical context to fulfill all righteousness.
Yeah.
But it has not been an effective participation. Now the courts have come out very clearly that if you must do public participation, there must be effective participation.
Yes.
There must be a feedback from the people who are participating. There must be a way of sieving out what in the recommendations those people have made have been adopted to modify, alter, or chart the path of the policy.
policy,
Otherwise, then it is, you know, easy for people to be gathered because there's an incentive in terms of a sum of money that is going to be payable to them to come and sit there for an hour or 2 hours. It's as a light day in the office, so to say.
Yeah.
And yet it doesn't impact on the outcome of the policy
yeah.
and its effectiveness in terms of implementation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Or sometimes just to get the numbers and say, but you see, but people are here. Yes. But really, the effectiveness of the same is
I don't know whether
question.
we have a minute.
All right, yes, before we go on.
Because what Prof mentioned about understanding, or is it you who mentioned about understanding? And one of the key challenges, if you look at the county integrated development plans as one of the policy instruments for county governments, for people to understand, it's at the least 200 something page document. You are working with communities that are probably challenged in terms of literacy, understanding of things. Yeah. So how do they find themselves in that to prioritize? Now that compounded that this information is provided probably 1 or 2 days or even sometimes hours before the event, the actual public participation event. So I think the conversation we are bringing here is, even as we talk about policies, when we talk about legislation, we have to put it in a language and in a manner that is palatable to the communities that we are working with, and hence the need for contextualization, but also the generational changes that are coming up. How do you leverage on technology, for example, to ensure that there's effective participation? And I think that's part of what we want to spice up the conversation on, that in this partnership, what can we do to ensure that there is effective
Absolutely. So that, again, we deal, first of all, with all these inequalities, and then once everybody has a better understanding, it's easier to also, again, like Prof said, measure the effectiveness of the said policies. All right, let's take a break. But when we come back, I'd want us to talk about a study, and we've mentioned here and there a little bit on the same, but we'll delve deeper into the study. And this was conducted last year, and that is 23rd of November all the way, from October all the way to November 14th last year, in 3 specific counties. And of course, we'll be talking about why those specific counties, first of all, and are there plans to also spread out to the rest of the counties. And the key areas or the key sectors were education, water, environment, health, HIV and AIDS, sexual and reproductive health rights, gender, persons with disabilities, as well as public participation, which we have talked about in this first part of the show. So let's take that break. When we come back, there's still so much more to discuss on the other side of the break. Stay with us. All right, welcome back. The show is Your World, and today it's all about public policy, and we're saying how important it is for, first of all, the communities, the people, to be involved in policy formulation. And today, of course, our focus of conversation is public policy, oil that drives the engine as far as development is concerned. And to help us with the conversation, we have Professor Jack Mwimali, who's the CEO and editor, National Council for Law Reporting, or Kenya Law. Okay, and we also have Titus Kuria, who's a program manager, public-private development partnerships, from Forum SIP. Good to have you this morning, gentlemen. And before the break, we're talking about how important, first of all, it is for the people to have understanding the whole process as far as policy formulation is concerned and public participation. But let's talk about a study that was done last year from October 23rd all the way to November 14th. We have touched on it a little bit during the first part of the conversation, and it was done in Nakuru, Kajiado, and Narok counties. I'm curious to understand why the specific counties, but let's first of all just start with the study in itself. What was it all about? What were you looking to see from the community? Prof, do you understand?
Perhaps.
All right, Titus. Okay, and then we'll talk about.
Maybe to just point out that the study were done in those 3 counties to determine the effectiveness. First of all, the extent of the policies that are in existence in various sets of circumstances or situations that you have just pointed out. But secondly, are those policies being implemented through a legislative framework? What are the outcome and outputs that we have from those policies, and whether there is need for further interventions in terms of formulation that needs to be done. So it was more of a tour to determine what is on the ground, whether what is on the ground is effective, and what interventions need to be done to ensure that we make them more effective.
Absolutely. All right, Titus?
Yeah, why Narok, Nakuru, and Kajiado counties? One is to say, in terms of our work, those are the counties that, of course, we had identified that are facing quite a number of challenges that are related to the poverty indicators. Because if you look at the topics that we have picked there, health,
education, yes, water, environment, yes.
They are basically people, and this is based on the PPDP model, which we have been trying to develop. Is how does development happen? So if you think of it from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what do you need to sort out first? And I think what we are realizing over time is that you need to sort out, as Maslow said then, is the basic things. So people need to access the right-based services before they can move to other higher levels of development. But that said, then we had been implementing that project before this study for about 5 years. And one of the key things that was coming out is, how do you ensure sustainability of some of the programs that you have put in place? How do you ensure that beyond, because programmatic interventions have timelines, they have a beginning period, they have a resource basket which ends at a certain period. So the question you are asking ourselves is then, how do you ensure that this work continues? And so the policy, embedding some of these things, including public participation on a policy framework, was one of the key ways to ensure that there is continuity beyond the programmatic interventions. How do you ensure, for example, that previously when counties would have public participation forums up to sub-county level, which now limits people's participation. We work together with the counties. We agreed it's important to now, cascade it down as the constitution spirit dictates to the lowest level of administration. So they are now doing it at ward level. But then to ensure that when someone comes in the next administration at whatever period, does not then decide that this is no longer going to be the case for whatever reason, either out of shrinking resources or whatever the reason would be, then we had to embed some of these best practices on a policy framework. So when we now did the initial study, we sought to find out, because the study we've done with Kenya Law is actually a complementary study from an initial study we did to identify the capacity gaps within the county governments. And the key finding then was that clearly there lacks the capacity within the counties, whether it's the institutional or the individual capacity in terms of human resource to drive the policy agenda. But then there was also some pointers that beyond the capacities, that the policies are actually cannot be found. So when this administration leaves, you asked, where is this policy? Do we have this legislation? So there is no that continuity or completedness of the cycle. Some, like Prof said, there are policies, but there is no legislation. In others, there are legislation, there is no policy. So then we felt that if we are to achieve the sustainability that we are seeking, it's very important to level that out. And so through, again, a partnership approach, we provided some resources to support that study, and then Kenya Law provided some resources. And then we must also acknowledge that in the new era of development, resources not only point out to financial resources, because there is that misunderstanding that you have to give money, but the expertise to actually look at these laws, to look at these gaps is something that Kenya Law brought on board. So we entered into an MOU. I think it's almost a year now. We are celebrating the anniversary actually this week, so it's a good time.
Oh, wow. Okay. I must say happy anniversary. But
and it came in very handy because as Kenya Law had been from the inception of the new constitution, documenting, and especially for the counties, what laws are there, what legal information is available. And in the course of going around, I can give you two very critical examples that we encountered. One of them, I went to a county I don't want to mention.
All right.
And the county attorney was looking for a law that they knew had been made in 2016. But it was nowhere to be found. Of course, as Kenya Law, we rely on them to supply us with this information so that we can stock and document them. But if they have not been provided to us, therefore we don't have. So no custodian of this legal information existed, and that county did not, or was not able to get a law that they had passed. The final copy of the final version of it. In another county, we had a situation where an act had been passed, I think in 2016. And in 2019, or 18 or 19, after the new government came into force, they didn't know that law existed. And they asked themselves, why don't we formulate a law along this line? Midway through, they discover that there was actually a law that has already been assented to, which meant it was not being implemented and had not been gazetted. So you can see the disparity in terms of what is actually being done and how that information is percolating. And for us then, it became necessary to start that process of tracking this legal information from the formulation of the policy through that process of amendment. Because sometimes midway, when you are formulating a law from a policy, you may have some options that you take deliberately and not others. And therefore you want to know what was the initial version of that bill, what were the changes that were made along the way, and what was the outcome document that now becomes an act of the county assembly, in the case of the national government, an act of parliament at the national level. If we do not have a clear framework that traces that from the policy to the end product, then you see there's that disparity. You may have done good work like Forum Civ has done, but at the end of it, it's not useful to the people because it has not been documented appropriately for it to be utilized.
And very quickly, let me allow you, and then I'll do a follow-up question to Prof.
Yeah, and I think again in recognizing the interest to work with Kenya Law, if you just choose to go to Google and want to find anything on policy in this country, Kenya Law comes up as one of as the easiest pick to get this. So the question or the inspiration to actually work with Kenya Law was, why can't that, because they are doing very well at the national government level, how do we create a pathway within which that can also be happening at the county level, so that, again, going back to what are the facilitators of effective participation is people need information. So if people can't access this information, then it becomes a big. So we felt that they had a good chance of supporting the counties to develop a model of how this information can be accessed.
I see that, and I think I was going to ask something in the same line. This is how detrimental is this? First of all, lack of such policies or laws, or if you can't find it,
yes.
right? So then, what does that say to the people that these policies and these laws are supposed to really serve? So how detrimental is that?
From a legal perspective, perhaps I'll answer from the Constitution.
Yeah.
One of the key tenets is prudent utilization of public resources. If we have taken time and we have also utilized public resources to formulate policies, to adopt laws that are not available for use, then we have wasted those public resources. It's very detrimental. To the people, again, it becomes that they do not benefit from the utility of a very progressive constitution, which they gave to themselves, knowing that it would now transform or change the environment. And from that perspective, then, we thought that if we start from the process of policy formulation and document all those policies that are in existence, document all the bills that have been generated from those policies, document the acts that have now been enacted from that process, it becomes very easy. And if you have the public participating throughout that process. In fact, it would not be the county attorney or the governor coming in and saying we don't have this law, because members of the public will already have known that we engaged in a process for formulation of a particular legislation. And we know the reason as to why it was important for us to adopt it in that sense, and therefore you would not have that break in the chain, and then therefore the public will be able to benefit.
I see that. And what are some of the other revelations that really emerge from the study? Because what Prof is saying is really very concerning, because then if the people, first of all, don't know that this exists, or who isn't custodian of the same, then it becomes difficult to hold, the leadership into account, because what do you measure, or how then do you hold them to account if some of these policies, some of these laws do not exist? But I'm just curious to understand what are some of these other revelations that emerged from the study.
I think we have diced through some of them now, but clearly there's a disconnect in terms of that whole policy making framework between
process,
policies and legislation. That's one of the clear gaps. Secondly, there is that limitation in terms of access to this information, both by the custodians of this document, as Prof said. If you can't find something in your house, then clearly there's a problem. Then thirdly is also something that we have not touched on, and I think Prof alluded to that, is the lack of commitment in terms of the financial resources for us to go through the whole policy making procedure. And I know the policy making process, I think, is a quite resource intensive endeavor. However, if we want to drive the change that we want, if we want to live to the spirit of, again, the constitution that we gave ourselves to, then we must also show commitment in terms of providing these resources. So the study also points to the counties in particular not providing enough financial resources to undertake this process, besides also the issue that we mentioned earlier of lack of internal capacity. I know there is opportunities to outsource these capacities, and I think maybe Prof can also mention how that has landed into quite a number of challenges. We've seen instances where someone is given a responsibility to support an entity in developing a policy, and they just copy and paste a policy from one. So, and the fact that this is only probably established in a court of law, for example, points to the lack of that internal capacity to do that. So that's one of the other key findings that we've come up. And I think it's good to mention that this probably is information that is already out there, but we wanted to undertake this study so that then we have a basis within which we can provide a way forward or an action plan towards this, because I think it's very easy to point where the problems are, but we pride ourselves in providing solutions to challenges that face communities, but also institutions that are held with the responsibility of ensuring that communities access their rights-based services.
I see that. And Prof, do you want to just touch base on that a little bit, and also talk about some of the available, opportunities then? Because if there are several gaps, if there are, problems that based on the study that you have identified, then lies opportunities to, provide solutions. And especially when it comes to the legislative, aspect of the same and the legal side of the same. So what are some of those opportunities that are available?
To start with what Teta said, I wanted to put it other ways. You may have a good law and a very good policy on the same subject that do not speak to each other. It's disastrous.
Yes.
So you need to align the laws and policies to ensure that those priorities that you have identified and the way you have chosen to deal with those priority areas speak to each other, and therefore the outcomes are clear. As a way forward from the research that we have done, we believe that it would be useful to start a process from the tail end. Take an item that is very critical for a particular county. Say, for example, healthcare. Just investigate the existence of policy on healthcare. Have they been implemented through legislation? If they have been, what is the level of implementation? If not, then formulate a policy on healthcare, derive from that policy a bill, drive it through the legislative process until it becomes an act, and document that entirety of that process so that in posterity, when one wants to refer, there is already a framework that they can easily refer to. And you see, most of these things are almost similar in as much as you may be talking about, say, healthcare and say housing. If you have clear healthcare policy and clear housing policies, it would be easy to implement other policies in other areas that are related to these. And most of them, of course, from a human rights perspective, we say the interdependency and interrelatedness of human rights. If you deal with the concern, for example, of poor infrastructure, then it leads to better health for those people. We are talking about floods at the moment. The poor infrastructure has led to loss of life, and that means also a strain to the health infrastructure that we have put in place. So we must address health from even the infrastructural perspective, and not just the health infrastructure, even the other survival infrastructure, water and all that. So the interconnectedness of these issues, if they are dealt from a very deliberate framework that we call a policy, would lead to a better outcome than doing it on the basis of as need arises. And in many cases, unfortunately, as a country, that's the approach that we have been taking. We wait until there is a challenge, and then we react towards that challenge. You see, the reaction would not take into consideration all the other factors that could be considered to have a better outcome.
Outcome of the same, and even the sustainability of the same, because we're dealing with the problem that is here and now, without focusing more on what the future then looks like. And I think that is the same case for some of these policies and laws, as well. So are there plans to escalate the study to some of the other counties, because again, different counties have their own legislation, they have their own policies and all those things. And Prof, I'll come back to you to then understand, in as much as they're different counties, they know their needs, which might be different from county to county, but then how do we make sure that we have a proper structure and the standard remains the same. It doesn't matter how many times a regime changes, the structure remains the same. I'll come to you for that. But Tetas, are there plans to also escalate the studies to other counties?
Yes, we have provided a framework in which you can cure the challenge that we are facing.
All right.
One is you need to diagnose where the challenges are, and then the studies have demonstrated that. And then this, as a sample, and from the conversations we've had with Kenya Law, is also mirrored in all the other counties, as per se. So for that reason, then we feel that there is opportunities to expand to other counties to undertake the similar process. However, in terms of the available resources at the moment, we want to focus on developing a working rhythm for the counties that we have already started working with in Narok, Nakuru and Kajiado. Right. And one of our commitments certainly is to also solve the challenge of capacity within the institutions. So we are working together with those counties to undertake a capacity development of what we are calling policy champions. And these are the people who within those counties then will be the people that will be relied on to provide direction when it comes to policy issues.
Yeah.
In terms of whether we can undertake the same process, I think we have provided a platform through the public-private development partnerships, and I think we are launching the report tomorrow. We have invited other partners, because again we work within a very constrained resource period. So again we also are opening up to other partners to see what are the opportunities for us to work together to scale up this work within other counties, including the counties themselves. If they commit to do that, then already this framework has shown what you need to do for you to achieve that. So I think those are the key opportunities and the way forward that lie within that.
I see that. And Prof, before you answer the question of ensuring this standard and structure for these policies and the laws as well, who then holds to account? I mean, based on what you said, for example, a certain county, some of these policies do not exist, some of these laws do not exist. Who then holds, the county government to account? Because the people themselves don't even know some of these things exist. So then who holds them into account? And then we'll talk about the whole aspect about structure.
Number one is, of course, there is a responsibility on the people. You cannot expect the government to work for you unless you want to also go the whole mile and ensure that that government does what you have or you want it to do. We have learned that the civil society is now becoming a very critical player, and that's why we chose the public-private development partnerships. Because unless the civil society also arises, the ordinary mwananchi may not know. And they may not even have the wherewithal to go through the process, and therefore having a system where we partner with the civil society, involve the mwananchi, and as public entity work together to ensure that that is dealt with, then it becomes effective if that process goes through that whole. On the first question that you've asked, I was smiling because there are situations where we have found that somebody was given work to formulate a policy and a law, and they went and found a policy and a law on that subject from, say, the United States, the state of California. So what they were doing was just changing from California to X county. X will do that. The challenge in that sense, then you see, it doesn't speak to the local context of that person. But that having been said, you see, if you have a draft framework that you can use, for example, now we are working with Narok, Kajiado, and Nakuru. It will become easy for, say, Trans Nzoia County or Kilifi County to formulate their framework on the basis of what has been developed locally, but to customize it to suit the context of that particular county. It is easier, it is nearer, rather than us going and borrowing a challenge that we have had from foreign countries. Some of them have totally different problems from what we face. And if we then are able to do what we are intending to do with the forum SIV, develop this policy, it means we will be able to help the counties have that capacity, and will give them an easier reference for what they do in terms of formulation of not just the particular ones that we would have assisted, but other policies. For us, Kenya law would have an easy time collecting all those legal information, documenting them, because we want to have the most comprehensive database of legal information available. And one of the things that you pointed out earlier, it is available on our website, free of cost. It just means any mwananchi who wants to know that there is an existing policy or framework on a particular subject can just go online, get it from Kenya law. So that would have fulfilled the government's priority on access to information and access to justice. So as a public entity, we see ourselves as being a bridge to meeting the constitutional imperatives.
I see that. And Prof, allow me to take that as your parting shot. And Titus, I'll just give you 30 seconds because we're literally out of time completely to talk about the launch that you mentioned, which will be happening tomorrow. And this is a report titled An Assessment of Public Policy Formulation, Capacity Gaps and Capacity Development of Actors in Nakuru, Kajiado, and Narok counties. Very quickly, like 30 seconds before we choose out of the studio.
I think if I'm to pick a rejoinder on who keeps the government accountable, one is, I like the topic we picked today, that public policy, the oil that drives the engine of development. So if you have a car and you take it to a mechanic and they do their inspection, they tell you, you know, we have checked the oil and we see a danger that if you don't change this oil, your engine is likely to knock. So I think that's what we've been able to do. And then if there's anyone who has a responsibility, I think civil society are the mechanics that have the capacity to check this engine of development and then whether the oil is working. And then we have demonstrated that we are able to do that, and new ways of working include the public-private development partnerships. In terms of the study launch, we will have a launch tomorrow. We have convened a public forum to just discuss those findings and then come up with a way forward. It will be happening tomorrow, starting at 8 a.m. To about 11 a.m.
All right. Okay, all the very best tomorrow in the launch. But allow me to say thank you so much this morning, Titus Kuria, Program Manager, Public-Private Development Partnerships from Forum CV. Thank you so much for your time. I'm CV, okay? Forum CV. Yes. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Professor Jack Mwimali, who's the CEO and Editor, National Council for Law Reporting. Thank you so much as well for coming by this morning. Really deep conversation that all of us need to be a part of, and I hope that you've learned a thing or two, and especially if you come from the specific counties where the study was done. Now you know what you need to do, all right? But for now, allow us to say goodbye. My name is Winnie Lubembe. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the rest of your viewing as well. Goodbye.